Welcome to this special Genesis Research webinar on the topic of how AI and machine learning can be incorporated across the product lifecycle to better identify and extract the evidence you need. My name is James Templeman. I'm delighted to be chairing the session. Joining me today are Chris Pashos, Chief Scientific Officer of Genesis Research, and Matthew Michelson, who is President of Genesis AI. To begin with, I'd like to give you an overview of the agenda and how the event will run. Over the next 70 minutes or so, we will have presentations from both of our speakers, followed by an opportunity for your questions and answers. If we can't answer all of your questions due to time constraints, our panelists will be more than happy to reply to your questions directly after the event. We'd like to start firstly with a little survey to see what your current thoughts are on AI. Please add your responses to the survey on the right-hand side of your screen. There's no submit button, so they are automatically logged. Okay, so the polling is now open. I'll just go through the responses and questions that we have for you. The first question is, what are your current thoughts on AI, machine learning, and how it might be of use to you? The options that you've got are, can't see the benefit of using it in my work, already using it, excited about the prospect but not yet ready to explore it, actively interested in finding out how we can incorporate it to our benefit, or finally concerned about the implications for skilled human contributions. That's question one. Question two is, where do you think its main usefulness lies? The options are speeding up and improving systemic literature reviews, identifying and extracting data to answer specific questions on any given day, providing continuous literature tracking to allow scientists to keep on top of the latest literature and changes in the evidence base, or don't know. And finally, question three, we'd like to know on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to begin exploring the use of AI or machine learning to complement your work over the next year? So we're going to give you a minute or so just to log your responses to that, check whether we're getting some responses in, and then we'll show them to you on screen. So if we move across to the first question, we're beginning to get some responses in. Okay, so the first question is the current thoughts on AI and machine learning. It seems like we've got a fair majority for actively interested, which I think is probably sensible bearing in mind the subject of the webinar. Okay, and other people are already using it and some people are very excited about it. We may be able to go into some of that a bit later on. So for the next question, question number 2, the usefulness. The index, this one is a bit more nuanced. Somewhere around 40% think that identifying and extracting the data is the most important useful aspect. Some are providing something that providing the continuous literature tracking is the most important. And we have a smaller number with the systematic literature reviews. So moving to question number 3. Okay, so most of us looks like we are seeing a large number of people, a large majority that are thinking about doing it in the next 12 months. Very small number thinking not, I would suggest. So it's looking like between 8 and 10 is our sweet spot there. So that's interesting. I'm interested to see how that changes during the webinar, whether some of the things you're going to see today might impact on that. So what I'd like to do now is move along with our first section of the webinar, which is first of our speakers today. So I'd like to introduce at this point Chris Pashos. Chris is the Chief Scientific Officer at Genesis Research. He's also a former Vice President at both Takeda and EVID. His focus is on RWE generation, patient-centric research, and other aspects of HEOR to support product evaluation from drug discovery through to development and commercialization. He has extensive experience in multiple therapeutic areas and has undertaken numerous analyses of existing databases, as well as interactive economic models and surveys to obtain data on the use of healthcare services and the outcomes of that care. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Matt and I are so pleased that all of you have joined us today. If you remember one thing from this webinar, it's knowledge is power, evidence is strength. And that's why we're talking with you today about evidence generation to strengthen clinical development evidence generation to promote commercial success, and ultimately to help improve patient access to new innovative medicines that provide value. Before we get into the presentation, just a moment to talk to you about the organization that Matt and I are so pleased to be part of, Genesis Research. Genesis Research has been serving the needs of the life sciences companies for more than a decade, focused primarily on real-world evidence generation and evidence synthesis, trying to better understand disease treatment and outcomes for and with our life science company partners in a way that helps them inform and improve their development and commercialization programs, and also to be able to articulate the value that their medicines bring to the key external stakeholders, regulators like FDA, EMA, PMDA, that alphabet soup of regulatory agencies all over the world. Regulators, then HTAs, health technology assessment authorities, and payers, again, who look at the world in unique ways, trying to better understand the unmet needs that patients have and the value that medicines have in reducing the burden of illness and articulating decisions that will improve the health and well-being of their citizens. And then the medical community, who's responsible for delivering the care to patients. Of course, the fourth stakeholder, last certainly not least, are the patients and the patient communities who live those indications, live those diseases every day. We need to be able to understand the evidence requirements that each of them need in order that they make their decisions. Regulators, market authorization, HTA and payers, coverage and reimbursement, the medical community, the ability to prescribe or not prescribe certain treatments in certain combinations, sequences, et cetera. And then the patients, will they take their medicines? Will they adhere to the prescribed regimens? So each of those four external stakeholders have a role in synthesizing the evidence and deciding their particular part of that healthcare ecosystem. And we need, as life science companies and our partners in the life science industry, need to better understand the unmet needs that each of those constituencies have and be able to provide them with the evidence that they need to make those decisions. And that's what Genesis Research does. One of the things that we focus on is making sure that we're planning the right evidence generation. So starting with strategy, then articulating what is the best way to generate, to synthesize the particular evidence that we have available, optimizing its presentation so that when we communicate it both internally across the different functions within the life science companies, from clinical development to market access, medical affairs, HEOR, on and on, we're doing it in a way that enables each of the functions within the company to better understand what's relevant, what's reliable, what can be used for basing future decisions in terms of that development and commercialization program. And then also being able to communicate it effectively to regulators, HTAs, the medical community, and the patient organizations. That's Genesis, and that's actually really the core of what we're presenting today, because evidence development has to be optimized as early as possible. We have to be good stewards of our company's resources. And so being able to optimize our development program, being able to understand what are the right inclusion-exclusion criteria, what are the relevant outcomes to be studied, when should we collect the data on those outcomes, being able to understand how treatment patterns are changing, and not just what were they 2, 3, 4 years ago. We need to understand how healthcare is evolving in every indication in which we're working, and indications that may be target for us in the future. So from development through communication, that evidence planning, generation, optimization, communication process is so critical, and we have to make sure we're doing it efficiently. Gaps in the knowledge base are gaps that we can fill. How do we best identify particular practice patterns in a market where there isn't much literature? We have to do some work to better understand them. And this goes not just to working in rare diseases, but even in more common ones, just where the knowledge base doesn't yet exist in as much detail as we would like. And at the same time, where there's a good knowledge, understanding of what's happening with respect to disease treatment and outcomes, we need to be able to understand, okay, care is what it is, outcomes are what they are, how can we improve? What are the unmet clinical outcomes need, economic outcomes need, and patient-centric outcomes need that we need to be able to prove that our new product has value and delivers value to those external stakeholders. So that's what evidence generation can do from the start of our development program through market access. And at the same time, recall that the healthcare ecosystem is constantly evolving. Treatments, our own and competitors, are being introduced or withdrawn from the market. Practice patterns are changing. We need to be on top of those changes. And so literature analysis is not something that can be done today and that's it. We need to constantly update our assessments. Literature is dynamic, so our assessments need to be regularly renewed. And remember, that's not just because we want to do it, but because our regulators, HTAs, the medical community, and the patients are also continuing to update their evidence base and their knowledge of what is going on. So in the next couple minutes, what we'll do is share 5 key points. Number 1, understanding diverse unmet needs as perceived by those external stakeholders creates opportunities for us as life science companies and partner research organizations to identify product value. Number 2, to best quantify those unmet needs, we have to make sure we understand the burden of illness, the clinical, economic, patient-centric burden of illness comprehensively as perceived not just by ourselves, but by each of those stakeholder types. And even within the stakeholder types, you'll have different HTAs that look at the world differently than others. NICE, for example, very different from ICWIC. HAS, very different from the US ICER organization. So we need to understand burden of illness and how it's perceived differently. At the same time, those different stakeholders, and therefore we within the life science world, have to appreciate what is the strength of the evidence that they're looking at. If they're focused on certain clinical endpoints or definition of a patient population that's most relevant for a particular treatment or treatment pattern, we need to understand what they're looking for in terms of the clinical trials, real world evidence, patient provided data. We need to understand what will move the bar in terms of having them make a decision one way versus another. So evidence and the support of the strength of that evidence is so important. Number 4, we need to make sure that as the knowledge base evolves, we're on top of those changes. And so we're making sure that we're learning how the evidence may be changing in a particular area, and we're accommodating that through changes in our research programs. And point number 5, This is a whole life science company effort, right? We have clinical development, market access, medical affairs, HEOR, functions across the organization that need to coordinate and make sure they're working together, understanding what the evidence base tells us, and then being able to make sure that the overall company program of research activities supporting evidence generation is coordinated and efficient. So let's take each of these points one by one. Number one, in identification of those unmet needs enables us to demonstrate and communicate the value of our products to those different external stakeholders. Think of what FDA or EMA, among other regulators, have shared with us by indication what's important to them in terms of the burden of illness that they're looking to evaluate as to whether our clinical programs have shown evidence one way or another as to the value of a new product in development. We need to understand what's important to them. And at the same time, that will be different in certain terms from what certain of the HTAs are looking at. So by understanding the unmet needs, the burden of illness as regulators and HTAs understand them, we'll be able to go back to where if we need to produce X type of evidence, in order to strengthen our discussions and our submissions to the regulators, to the HTAs, we'll have a program that hopefully succeeds if the data show that value. We want to make sure that our clinical trials are optimally designed. We want to make sure that our complementary RWE efforts also are on target with respect to what do we need to show and how can we show them effectively. And ultimately, the success of that program will be whether we've shown the value of our products in addressing those unmet needs and reducing the burden of illness. The next slide is all about evidence sources. We live in an era of new and evolving data platforms. We're not restricted only to claims data or even to electronic medical records data. We now have access to molecular biomarker data, genomics data. We're able to collect data from the patients themselves, not just patient-reported, but also wearables. We need to make sure that we're understanding what those different types of data can provide to us as articulated in the many different, say, outputs of those external stakeholders. So the regulators, the HTAs, will release guidances, guidelines, decisions on other treatments, and we need to learn from those. The same way with the medical community, not just the KOLs, but what is being published in their journals, what is being released at the latest conferences. We need to make sure that we're attentive to those because they're providing some of that knowledge base that is growing, evolving, and we need to be aware of it. The same way with the patient organizations. In certain cases, you have certain diseases that have multiple patient organizations all striving to look out for the well-being of their communities. We need to be aware of and hopefully, in certain cases, partner with those patient organizations to better understand what's important to them, because if it's important to them, it's important to us in the life science world. The same way, we know that each of those different stakeholders will take a look at different types of evidence in different ways. Think of how certain HTAs will focus on different types of studies compared to others. We need to understand how the different HTAs will ingest that information and basically test the evidence base with respect to a lens, not just of what did the evidence say, but what is the type of evidence, clinical trial, real world evidence. Is it clinical effectiveness only? Is it clinical plus cost effectiveness, et cetera? And by knowing what's important to those external stakeholders, again, we can better design our programs to generate the right data at the right time. One of the things that we're living in a very exciting time, in that there's so much work being done in many therapeutic areas. Here, the example of cancer, but you can point to cardiovascular, neurology, immunology. So many academic groups, physician groups, along with life science companies, are working hard to generate new data. And we need to make sure that when we do, for example, a systematic literature review or a targeted literature review, that we update that over time. Take a look at this little example at the bottom of this slide, where early in the year we may complete an SLR. But guess what? In the middle of that year, along come ASCO, along come EHA, two very important congresses that we know there's going to be interesting data, interesting evidence that's released. And then toward the end of the year with ESMO and EHA, ASH, we're going to have even more data. So we want to make sure that we're on top of the literature and we're continuing to update it over time. And so the final story is just understanding we've got a lot of data out there, important to us, important to each of the different functions within our organization. At the same time, very important to our external regulators, HTAs, medical community, and patients. And we want to make sure we understand the similarities and the differences of what they're looking for, so that we can plan accordingly and design our program of research in a way that is going to meet those needs. So again, just to wrap up before I turn it over to Matt, or before that, a little Q&A, we need to make sure we understand the diverse unmet needs of our external stakeholders, because when we do, it creates opportunities for us to identify potential value that then we follow up on in our program, in our clinical development and market access relevant program of research. Secondly, quantifying unmet needs absolutely depends on understanding burden of illness. And that burden of illness will have multiple vectors: clinical, economic, patient-centric, and it may vary by various elements of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity of treatment, heterogeneity of patient, and heterogeneity of health system. We need to understand how that burden of illness may vary. Third, the different stakeholders look at evidence in different ways. We need to appreciate that and factor that into our clinical development and commercialization programs. We need to do that, number four, in a very dynamic nature. Make sure that we're aware, we're on top of the most recent data, because the most recent data may affect those decisions made by regulators, HTAs, the medical community, and patients, because it does move the needle in terms of what is the best treatment for the patient at a certain time. And finally, since so many organizations, so many functions within a life science company are responsible for evidence synthesis, evidence generation, evidence communication, we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive view across the organization of unmet need, burden of illness, strength of evidence in a dynamic way, so that we're all coordinating, collaborating, and ultimately putting together the most efficient and most effective evidence generation process for the company. So without further ado, let me take any questions and answers. And once we get a couple questions answered, then we can turn it over to Matt Michelson. Thank you very much.
Okay, so welcome, Chris. Thank you for that very detailed presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have time for a full Q&A at the end of the webinar, but I think we do have time to take one question for now. What I just wanted to do is just let you know how to submit your questions. On the right-hand side of the screen in the interaction panel, you'll be able to submit your questions that come directly to us, and we'll be able to get through them, as many of them as we can before the end of the Q&A. In the meantime, I think we do have time for one, so I'm just going to have a quick look here for the ones that are for Chris. Okay, so we have one here from John. Thank you, John. John asks, identifying burden is one thing, but in your experience, how do you go about judging the strength of that evidence?
Great question, John. Thanks for asking it. First of all, I look back to what FDA has said, and what are they looking for across the board? Relevance, reliability. Then I think about what is it about this particular set of evidence that we're reviewing? What are we going to do with it? If it's for internal decision making, then I really try to focus on how representative is this study relative to the needs that we've identified within our clinical development or commercialization research program. Look at the indication, look at the inclusion-exclusion criteria relative to the patient population, look at the outcomes, what have they been measuring, how have they measured it, how does that compare with our own view of what the patient population looks like and what we're trying to assess. That's for internal decision-making. For external decision-making, we then think about the regulators or the HTAs or payers who we're doing work for, or we're generating evidence that will be applicable to meeting their needs. And we try to look through their guidances, their past decisions, to see what's been important to them. And then we assess this particular new body of evidence that we're looking at, study or studies, to see how comparable are they. Do they meet the needs of decision-making made by these particular external stakeholders? And I think, especially if we're early in the development program, we want to be able to engage with the regulators or the HTAs directly, ask them specifically, is this the type of evidence that you're looking for? How can we make it stronger for you? And having that ability to interact with our external stakeholders will give us a better sense for what makes the best evidence platform, what is the best type of evidence that we, as we move forward, need to be able to be mindful of. So relevant, reliable, and making sure we understand why it's being used and put it to good use.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. That was John, I hope that answered your question successfully. And we are after lots more questions, so please do submit your questions in the right-hand side. We'll be moving on to the Q&A after the next section. So for now, can we move on to the next section of the webinar? I'd like to introduce our second speaker of the afternoon, the day, depending on where you are. Matthew Michelson, PhD. So Matt is the president of Genesis AI at Genesis Research. He's a computer scientist with a focus on AI. Matt has published more than 40 peer-reviewed articles, mainly at the intersection of machine learning and healthcare. Along with his team, it was Matt who developed NIH-sponsored research on machine reading and created the EVID AI platform. Matt and his team continue to explore ways in which different data sources can be absorbed to answer complex research questions. And we're pleased to have him with us this afternoon. Welcome, Matt. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Now I'm going to speak about the use of AI to support all of these different evidence generation tasks. At the high level, what I hope you get from this talk are three main points. The first one is that evidence is a combination of multiple results. We're going to pull results that are related to economic studies, trials, observational studies, epidemiology studies, even humanistic biomarker reviews. And the evidence itself is the amalgamation of all of those different results. But getting all of those results comes with a significant cost. It takes a lot of time to go through all of that literature by hand. And that has a significant effect on morale. Mistakes can be made, and it's just challenging to have to go through that much literature. And in particular, if an AI system can focus on the task of pulling the results out of the data in an automated way, the human beings can then better spend their time on the analytical tasks, the creative tasks, the things that are out of scope from what a machine can do, and frankly, the things that are more fun and interesting. And so an AI can actually assist with the data gathering abilities, and this really helps alleviate the burden. And the first benefit is obviously speed. The machine is going to do this a lot faster than a human being can read through all of these papers because it's built purpose specific to that. But it's not just doing things in a fast way. It's very broad, and it has all the coverage that you would expect. In fact, in a forthcoming study, we show that we can replicate the finding of the key citations for 5 random HTA submissions. So you're getting the data that you would expect using AI tools. Not only is it fast, and not only does it have the right coverage, but it's high quality data. We've published a number of articles indicating that the AI is able to pull out the results in a high quality way. And again, quality in the sense that the individual results that are pulled out are high quality, but also high quality in the sense that they've been accepted by key stakeholders, the larger HTA bodies in the world. And in fact, we work with them. And part of the reasons they're accepted is not only is the data high quality, but it has a deep level of transparency. And in particular, we always have the provenance of where the data comes from. So anytime you see a result that's been touched by the AI, you can trace it back to the sentence that it came from, trace that sentence back to the article, and trace that article all the way back to its source. And it's really important in AI systems, and that's a first-party principle that we've built into our tools. And then by lowering this time burden, that allows for more flexibility, the ability to be more up-to-date than you would normally. And you can support not only these large, structured, premeditated tasks, but also any kind of quick things you might want to do right now. So you have all these different tasks that have prescripted budgets and people that are pulled in, and the AI can help there. And then on day-to-day tasks, when you have a lot of effort, you don't want to spend the evening going through the literature, the AI can help there too. So these are the main benefits of why it's important to integrate AI into these evidence generation tasks. We do that using the EVID AI system. At a very high level, this is what the system looks like. Moving from the literature to the AI-generated evidence to the platform, starting on the left, we see the literature itself. The system is going to ingest all of the literature it possibly can. It's read the entirety of PubMed, including every result that's published at night. So it's always up to date in that regard. In addition, the AI has read a number of conferences. These are largely driven by interest from existing customers. So we have coverage in oncology, immunology, diabetes, but we're always open to adding more. In addition, if you have any other private data, unpublished manuscripts, PDFs that you have the copyright to, or other systems with papers, you can send them to us in the system. The AI will read them. They'll be firewalled off in private just to you. And then all those results will be available. So the AI system is ingesting this entirety of the literature, putting it into the database once it's read it. And this database is huge. It's the largest in the world with more than 80 million data points of evidence already. This database then sits underneath the platform that has an intuitive way to access all of these results and find what you're looking for. Therefore, by using the AI-generated results and finding and filtering down to what you care about, you get all this unprecedented speed and breadth and help from the system getting those results to free you up to do all the other tasks. And we'll show a demo of this live. So as I mentioned, the AI system is sitting on top of all these different data sources. It has PubMed, it has oncology conferences, immunology conferences, diabetes conferences, but it's flexible and customizable. I think the way to think about this is not just that it's an AI system, but really it's a database of results. These results all come from the literature. And if we would do it, if we're able to do it without an AI, we would, right? We would have human beings, scrub all the articles, pull out all the results, put them in the database, but it's not feasible. You need an AI to reach that level of scale. And so that's really generating this database in a customizable way. You can send us, different articles that you want the machine to read, and it can run them through. You can point us to different conferences that matter to you, and they can get in there. So it's a customizable database of results pulled from the literature in an automated way. How does that actually work? We call this machine reading, and it actually is solving 2 AI problems simultaneously. In AI and machine learning, we call this joint inference, because solving one problem can help solve the other. So starting at the top here, this is an actual sentence from an article. It contains 12 different results embedded in the text itself. And so if we narrow and focus down on just those two that are highlighted in the blue box there, the 80.5% and the 55.4%, the task that the machine is going to do, that the AI is going to do, is to understand what do those really refer to? What is 80.5% referred to in the sentence? You can see it's highlighted there, guselkumab and adalimumab for Investigator Global Assessment 01. But there are 12 such results embedded in the sentence. And even kind of parsing that by hand and looking at it, right, is slightly overwhelming. So jumping down now to the second thing there, you see this black bar with color-coded boxes. This is a debug screen from the AI. In other words, it's allowing us to interrogate what the AI is doing. And you can see it's highlighted different phrases with different colors. So it's highlighted guselkumab in red and adalimumab in red. And you can see it's got a label GINV if you can't see the color there. And what that's doing is the system is first in this joint inference task, identifying phrases and categorizing them. So it's going to go through the sentence and say, guselkumab is an intervention, adalimumab is an intervention. But intervention in this context is really a large definition. We really actually mean group assignment. So these are the groups that have been assigned these two interventions specifically. But it could also be patients with muscle wasting disease, patients in different cohorts, men versus women, anything like that. Second, in green, you can see that the machine has highlighted different outcomes or endpoints. Here it's showing that it's highlighted Investigator Global Assessment 01 at week 48. It's actually going to highlight week 16, week 24, and PASI 90 all in green at once, because those are all different outcomes or endpoints, and it's been trained to recognize those. And then you can see it's also highlighted the 80.5% and the 55.4% that we were asking about above. And it's highlighted those in orange or with that bold O percentage sign. And it's going to do that for all the percentages as well. So when we talk about a joint inference problem, the first problem it's going to solve is to go through this text and highlight in all the different colors, essentially label all those different phrases as the right semantic category. The second task that it's going to solve is linking them together. So it's going to understand that 80.5 actually refers to guselkumab's Investigator Global Assessment 01 at week 48. It's not the week 24, the week 16 value. It's also not the PASI 90 value. And so the machine is going to take this text, break it into these labels, and then correctly assign all the labels to the right pieces. And in doing so, it essentially structures it as an evidence table. So text comes in, evidence tables come out. And we call that machine reading. And if you do this at massive scale, that's how you end up with more than 80 million results. I think the really important thing to understand here is that we've trained the machine so that it has a semantic understanding of what these phrases really mean. What does semantic understanding mean? Well, if you were looking at something like survival in text and you just did a keyword search, you're going to get sentences just say, you know, survival is a challenge in oncology. And they're talking about survival, but not in the context of an evidence table, not with an associated result. Meanwhile, the AI understands the difference between survival being referenced in a sentence generally and survival being an actual result that's generated by some article. So, you know, the overall survival is X, Y, Z. And we'll see that in the example. And so that's why this is far more powerful than just a keyword search capability, because the system is breaking these results down into these different structured representations so you can find, filter, and get what you need. So obviously there are significant benefits that I've referenced before. The first one is obviously speed. So we'll show you in the demo how we can narrow down to important key results in just seconds, rather than the hours it might take to read all these articles by hand. In fact, in some internal benchmarks doing title and abstract screening from PubMed, we found that we go 59 times faster speeds to decision. So in other words, using the machine to find the results that we cared about in screening took 2 hours versus manual effort, which took about 118 hours. That's a very significant savings. In addition, in JMIR, we published a 30-minute meta-analysis. So that we posed the question about ocular toxicity for hydroxychloroquine, and then using the AI, pulled all those results from the literature and did the analysis from the beginning to end in about 30 minutes. Also, there's significant breadth. Once the machine is reading the entirety of all this published literature rather than a human, you have deep, deep coverage. So one recent paper we published showed that in a fraction of the time, we actually found more articles than a manual effort. And in addition, 15 times fewer irrelevant articles appeared. So you're finding more of what you need using the AI. And because the machine has been generalized, in other words, the AI understands all sorts of different therapy areas and interventions, is not specifically focused on one, it covers them all. So it can cover multiple functional needs, which we'll touch upon, and also all the different therapy areas. It also covers different types of data, preclinical data, clinical data, right, trials and observational studies, epidemiology data, even economic studies for HEOR needs. In addition, in the second half of the year, we'll be rolling in humanistic data, so PROs and things like that, as well as reviews and biomarker data. The idea is to be able to answer evidence questions all the way from the beginning of research through post-marketing. And the data has to be high quality, and it is. So this data has been accepted in resubmissions to major HTA bodies. We also work very closely with one of the major HTA bodies currently on research related to literature surveillance with AI and other AI tasks. The AI extractions themselves are highly accurate. We published a very transparent set of analyses in that same JMIR paper, including the extractions themselves. So if you ever want to dig into how we did that, it's there, and they're high quality. And as I mentioned before, we have a forthcoming replication study where we took 5 random HTAs, looked at the safety and efficacy sections, and saw, do we find those citations in the tool? And we replicate that approach, and we did. So you might ask how this is different from other tools. There are a lot of other tools that are focused on different pieces of the evidence puzzle, but none of them use AI as deeply and as broadly to support all of the different capabilities you may need. And again, the way to think about EVID is really an AI-generated database of these results. So it supports all the different activities versus something that's more specific. So some of these tools have very strong web presence and a really nice user interface, but the human beings are curating the results. So you'll task a team and say, humans, go get this data, put it in the site for me, and then allow me to interact. And the challenge there is the time it will take those human beings to collate and gather all that data. And the AI on the EVID side, meanwhile, is gathering them. Some of the tools are very specific to specific tasks. So they may only work for screening articles. So once you have the results, you say, I like this one, I don't like that one. That's an actual feature in the EVID platform as well. We look at that as just a feature, not a full capability. In fact, you want the AI to get you those results and then do the screening. And I'll show that in the demo. And then there are other tools that are using different machine learning techniques, more pattern-based approaches and things like that. And those will work, and there'll be high quality extractions in narrow areas. But by using machine learning, you can generalize outside of patterns. So it's not just that X causes Y or X is associated with Y, where X and Y are different interventions and outcomes. But our machine is able to tease out all the different diverse representations because of the machine learning techniques we use. Finally, a tool that's gaining popularity is Causally. It's a great tool, a very interesting tool. And it's used to optimize the initial search capabilities. So what are the right ways to find all the articles that I want? And it's a wonderful complement to the EVID database. So you can use the Causally tool to find all the articles you may care about in the first place, and then say, for these articles, what is the set of results? What are the data? And then you can use the EVID AI to say, for those papers, this is the data. And by combining those tools, you have significant efficiency from 2 different AI approaches. As I mentioned before, the EVID AI database of results is useful for larger structured tasks. And these are examples that you may find, targeted literature reviews, other kind of systematic literature reviews, things related to epi and burden of illness, all the way down to finding the right KOLs and looking at cost effectiveness and budget impact models. And you can structure these projects, pull in the people in the budget, and have the database there to support all of these needs in a deeper, more efficient way. On the flip side, there are lots of rapid questions that you may have day to day. You may need to find a point estimate for a given model, or you may want to just assess what are the different AEs that are reported for competitors. And you can get very rapid answers for the smaller projects. You don't have to spend the night going through PubMed anymore. You can just ask the tool, get the answer, and you're good to go. So it works for larger structured tasks in addition to these smaller, more rapid tasks. So it's supporting both of those needs. And as I mentioned before, it's working broadly across teams. So there are use cases in HTOR related to economic data. There are EPI uses, medical affairs for launch support, KOL identification, even in licensing, where you have to do diligence on markets and outcomes and who are the given players. So the tool is purpose-built for pulling out results, but general so that it can be used across all of the different users. Now we're going to shift to a demo. So I want to tell you the story behind this demo. This was a real question that we got from a customer, and they wanted to understand initially what the survival rates were for patients who had non-small cell lung cancer and cachexia, which is muscle wasting. And the challenge they were having was, on the one hand, they just searched for non-small cell lung cancer, and then we're going through by hand. And there are thousands and thousands of papers to have to do that, and that's an inefficient way to find survival results. As we mentioned, doing a keyword search for survival is very, very challenging because you're going to get a lot of talk of it without the specific results themselves. There's a semantic difference between the notion of survival and the reported result of survival. Next, they tried very, very specific searching. So they did lots of complicated searching and ended up with just a few papers. And they knew that there had to be this sweet spot in between. So using the EVID Science platform, they entered the search, were able to use the AI-generated filters from those evidence tables, as I'll show you, get down to the survival results they care about, and do the analysis. Subsequently, because they enjoyed the use of the tool and they found it efficient, they had some other questions. They wanted to know, what is the prevalence of cachexia among the NSC LC patients? So that's really an epi-related question. And then they want to understand if there are any comparative cost studies or anything like that, again, associated with the cancer and the muscle wasting disease. And so in the tool, you can do that, both of those questions very, very rapidly. So I'll jump into that now, and I'll show you how that goes. All right, so now what you're seeing is the EVID Science platform. The first thing I'm going to do is log in. And you're presented with a search bar. It should look very familiar. And in fact, our search bar can comprehend all of the different PubMed syntax that you may normally be used to, the large Boolean operators and or, as well as even the square bracket commands for narrowing by mesh term or even date range, things like that. And what you'll see is we're going to search the literature. The machine is going to go through all of those tens of millions of results, and it's going to present them to us. Again, the metaphors will be familiar. You'll be able to filter down using Pico criteria, but rather than an Amazon shoe size or color or something like that, you'll see that you can do it based on the groups, the interventions, etc. So I'm going to load up the query here. You'll see that I've, and just to show you all the different capabilities it has, we'll add some parentheses around these. I have two ways then to search the literature. And we can search the evidence, or I could search for experts. For now, we'll just search the evidence. The system is now churning through all of those different results to find the ones that are related to what we care about. You can see the system has found about 284 papers related to this query, and the AI has pulled results from 161 of them. 53 of those are trials, and 97 are observational, epi, etc. The first thing that you'll notice are all of these filters on the left that I was talking about. We have a problems filter, an interventions, outcomes, source, year, etc. These are all generated by the AI. So the machine has gone through and parsed out the different texts into these different evidence tables, stored them in the database, and that allows us to filter through. So our initial question was looking for survival. So we'll come down to the outcomes results here, and we'll type in survive. Whoop. There we go. Helps if I can spell. You can see the diverse representation of all of the different ways that survival is represented here. So obviously there's median survival, median overall survival, 5-year survival rates, recurrence-free survival rates. Some of these might be hard to punch in by hand if you had to think about all of them, but the machine understands. And you can see that what the machine learning is showing us is that it's not just going through this keyword of survival, it's finding all of these large representations of the outcomes. So what we're going to do is just say, let's scoop all these results in and apply them. As you can see now, the results are all associated with different aspects of survival for these 35 papers. So we can drill into any one of these, and we can see what the response rate was, and then what the median progression-free survival was, for instance, in the cachexia group and the non-cachexia group at 4.2 months and 7.1 months. So the system is parsing this particular sentence here and showing us what the median progression-free survival would be. As we talked about before, everything is associated with provenance and transparency. So you can see the different results that are pulled from this particular sentence. This particular sentence came from this particular paper. And if we click through, we go right to the source. So you always have that level of provenance. In addition, you can see a number of different tags that the system is associated with this article. It's an observational epi paper focusing on human beings. It's interventional, looking at Pembro here, and it was a retrospective study. So once we have all these different survival results, we could export them to Excel, or we could add them to a collection to do screening, just like I mentioned before. So we consider screening a feature, and we have a full-blown dual-blinded screening capability built into the tool. In addition to these survival results, as I mentioned, the people were curious about the epi and the cost results. So let's dig into those. So all we have to do is go back to our set. You can see that we've reset to our 161 papers here. Jump into our outcomes, and let's look for the prevalence. So overall, we have a few papers talking about prevalence of muscle depletion or cachexia. The interesting thing here is that severe muscle depletion is a synonym of cachexia. So we'll highlight those, we'll hit apply, And now we're back into the different results view. So we can see that there are 2 papers. This one looks to talk about patients with prevalence here. And we can see that 69% of their study cohort had cachexia, whereas in this article, we see the overall prevalence of severe muscle depletion was 46.8%. So just like that, in a few clicks, we've drilled down into the epi. Finally, let's look at cost. All we have to do is come into our AI generated filters here. We'll type costs. We see that there's one article here. We'll highlight it. And in particular, this is a pretty interesting result because this sentence is talking about comparative costs for cachetic and non-cachetic patients, so patients with cachexia not. You can see that cachetic patients cost 4.2 times more per person versus the non-cachetic, and you have the overall spend in yen for the first year of inpatient medical costs. So just like that, we've drilled into clinical results talking about survival, epidemiology results looking at the prevalence of cachexia in these populations, and cost results focusing on, in this case, the cost in yen for inpatient medical costs. So that's a whirlwind tour of how you can drill into the data, but the power of the system is really coming from the ability to search, leverage the fact that it's extracted these evidence tables, and then filter through them. Of course, you can then export them or do something else, but that's the power of the AI here, narrowing down to what's important to you right away. All right, coming back from the demo now, hopefully it's clear from the different summaries and takeaways, what the concrete, actual practical value of this high-level technology will be. So obviously, evidence is a combination of different results, economic results, clinical results, epidemiology results, but those are associated with significant human costs that the AI can then alleviate. This allows you to focus on the creative analytical tasks instead. And we've shown how the AI can actually do this, how it can use that unprecedented speed and breadth to get you all of that data that you would want right away. And by lowering the time to that time burden, that time to decision to get that data, you can be more up to date. So I could run the search I just ran every week if I want to do every month, depending on when those needs are. And I could be more flexible. Maybe it's not small cell lung cancer that I don't want those results for anymore. Now it's renal cell cancer or something like that. And I can go back, run the exact same methodology, get all those results very, very quickly. And again, as we mentioned, these will support large structured tasks, programs that you've put in place that you've allocated ahead of time, but also the right now needs. So maybe there's a large study to be done from all of those cachexia results, and maybe you just need point estimates for the model for the next day's work. But both of those activities are supported by the results in the database that have been pulled out by the AI. So at this point, we're going to switch to the Q&A, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. That was a great insight into how the inner workings of the system. So welcome along to the Q&A section. I'd just like to encourage our viewers to continue submitting your questions to the right-hand side of the screen. We've still got time for a few more, although I've seen a good number come in. Just wanted to have a quick look through the questions and see which ones so I can send them to the correct person. We've got one here, which I think is probably a Matt question straight away, which has come from Philip. So thank you, Philip, for that. The question is, how quickly can you generate a review using the system? If I have questions for payers about the disease area, competitors, standards of care, how quickly can this be generated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that. So firstly, it's going to depend on the size and scope. But oftentimes you can get the data that you need to answer these questions in a day or less. I think a really compelling example of that was when we did the JMIR study. We looked at the ocular toxicity of hydroxychloroquine and did a meta-analysis of that. And the whole thing from kind of the research question that we had to getting the data and doing the analysis took about 30 minutes. So that was very, very rapid. So, you do gain a lot of kind of, rapid ability. But I think in addition, it's important to emphasize that not only will you get the results you want very quickly, but you have a significant breadth and high quality data behind that. So, oftentimes if you're a human being, you're looking through, one study estimates that a person will miss about 8% of the citations that they should find by hand. But by leveraging the machine, you have that extra capability to kind of find all those results that you may need. So it's fast, it's broad, and it's a very high quality data. So, to answer the question, bringing it back around, hopefully it's a day. If it's an enormous thing, it could be a little bit longer than that, but it will be significantly faster than what you could do by hand with a higher level of breadth and quality.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. It was good to get a bit more info on that. Okay, just having a look here. There's, as luck would have it, another question for you, Matt. Caroline, one here from Caroline. She's asking about, I think, the scope of how the system operates. So, assuming that EVID contains all the evidence for the past 20 years, say, if we wanted to consider older publications, can these be added?
Good, Caroline. So in fact, the entirety of PubMed has already been, quote, read by the machine. So that goes all the way back, I think it's like 1890 or something. So, even if you wanted results from 100 years ago, the system would have those results in there. And then it's updated every night. So it's always, as fresh as kind of the regular, web-based PubMed search would be. So the answer is yes, it goes all the way back. And then, in addition, the data could be customized as needed. So, we mentioned that there's a lot of different conferences that are in there. If your area happens to be dermatology or ophthalmology, and it's an area that we don't yet cover, we can start to pull in those conferences as well. So yeah, the answer is yes, we can go all the way back, and we're as current as today.
It's fully customizable. Excellent. Okay. Okay, so I think it's probably time we brought Chris back into the discussion. So it's good to have you back, Chris. Thank you for your patience. We've got a question. Jane has a question here, which I think is to do with value add around the system. So her question is, the process defined by NICE and Cochrane for SLRs is very comprehensive. She says, I'm unsure how AI can improve upon an already complete process. So could you let us know how you could?
Wonderful question. And indeed, I think Matt has spent a lot of time answering the aspects of greater speed and greater comprehensiveness. It gives you greater confidence that you're capturing, you're identifying, capturing, assessing the literature in a way that will give you confidence that you're doing the right assessment. But think about what's most valuable to you in your day-to-day work, and that is time, right? By being able to use AI to do these types of assessment quicker, more comprehensively, it then gives you that much more time to be able to think through what are the implications of what we've just found. And those greater insights can then lead you to better being able to share the value of what you've learned with other functions across your organization, as well as be able to represent this body of evidence in a way that meets your development and commercialization needs to those external stakeholders. So speed plus greater comprehensiveness yields greater insights.
Great, that's great. That's great. Okay, so another one from Matt. This one comes in from Claude, and he's asking which HTA bodies and academic bodies already use EVID? So where is it in use in the field?
Yeah, good question, Claude. Thank you. So the data has actually been submitted to two major HTA bodies, so HAAS in France and NICE in the UK. And the data was acceptably used. And I think really a lot of that comes from the fact that we've really baked pretty deep provenance and transparency as kind of first-party principles into the platform. So kind of as I showed in the demo, you can always trace a result back to where it came from. And in fact, there's packaging in the tool so that as you get ready to submit, the entire chain of what you've done can be reproduced in a very transparent way. There are these Prisma diagrams to show everything that's happening. And so, we have kind of comprehensive support to make sure that, you can really drill down into that. And in addition, we actually work with, I can't name it, but we work with one of the major EU HTA bodies currently, doing a lot of research with them on how the tool can support what they do. And, they're a pair who's known for, very, very high quality work. And we also work with the Choice Institute out of the University of Washington, for instance. They're, a really important academic group focusing on HEOR. So we do have a lot of academic partnerships and kind of HTA governmental partnerships, both ongoing and in the works. And, for anyone else in the audience who is in those areas, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's something that's very important to both Chris and myself, that we kind of encourage and strengthen those ties to those parts of the community.
So it's a broad base there. Excellent. Okay, moving on, we have a question for Chris. I think this was an open question, but I'm gonna send it to Chris. This one came from Paul, and his is a searching one. Is this really a daily tool for someone working in HEOR? For those that are time crunched, accessing data can be challenging. Chris, you're just on. You're on mute for a second.
Very good. And think back to what Matt said about the JMIR article. Here was a very involved study that they were able to do in less than a day, less than an hour. All across your daily work, you're going to have questions. AI, EVID is a platform, is a tool that you can use to facilitate those quick answers and enable you to be much better informed when you go into discussions with colleagues as to what's happening in your particular indication relevant to your product in development or on the market.
Okay. So yeah, accessibility is the thing. Okay, we're just looking here. And if you do have any other questions, by the way, we do have a bit of time, just under 10 minutes to go. So please continue to submit them on the right-hand side. Okay, so another one, this one comes in from Sarah. And the question is, what's the accuracy rate for information extracted by EVID?
Good question, Sarah.
Yeah.
So I assumed that one was for me. We've done a number of peer-reviewed publications looking at various aspects of the accuracy of the tool. But I think the one that to me speaks the most and is really my favorite is the as yet unpublished just submitted paper that took 5 random HTAs, looked at the safety and efficacy section, and then reproduced the kind of search filtering piece to find all those citations, and it did. And the reason why that one is my favorite is that you can do all sorts of slicing and dicing and analyzing of how accurate it is, but really it's where the kind of proof in the pudding, where the rubber meets the road. How practical is this AI for finding what you need to find? And that result speaks to that. It says, look, these were the results that were in this study, and we replicated those with the AI, obviously in a faster way, in a more comprehensive and deep way. And so, to me, that's my favorite kind of assessment of accuracy was, did you get what you expected? Yes, we got what we expected.
Okay. So yeah, that's how you're going to be judged ultimately. Yeah. Okay. And sorry, Chris, this one is another one for Matt. You mentioned PubMed and some conferences. Are there any limitations to the data that can be read by the system?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. In fact, no. So we are limited in some sense by copyright. So it's not a technical limitation, it's a legal limitation. So you would need to have the ability to send articles to us that were outside of the scope of what we have already. And then we can run them through. And an example of that is people have actually sent us unpublished internal manuscripts that we can run through the system and show them the results for. In some sense, the system doesn't care what it's reading. As long as it looks like medical articles with results and all of that, it will just read them comprehensively. So it's not really a technical limitation anyway. It's really just a copyright limitation.
Okay, that's fine. And yeah, very interesting. So, okay, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have to move on. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for your questions. We still have a couple of bits to do in the webinar. So if we didn't get around to answering your questions, apologies. We will be able to answer them afterwards. Our expert speakers are happy to answer them to you directly. So hopefully you're now thoroughly enlightened on the use of AI for identifying and extracting the evidence that you're going to need. What I'd like to do now is have another poll, another survey, and then we're going to have a look at how those views points may have changed during the course of the webinar. So our second survey should be on the screen now, and we'll just have a look at that. Again, we're going to give you a few minutes just to have a look, a few moments just to have a look through those. I'll read through them. This is, so the first question is, following this webinar, it's very similar to the first section. Following this webinar, what are your thoughts on AI and machine learning? So slightly truncated set of responses that are possible. You could be interested and would like to revisit in the future. Still can't see the benefit of using it in my work, potentially. Actively interested in finding out how we can incorporate it to our benefit. The second, so it's one of those options. The second question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how has your knowledge of the use of AI machine learning increased as a result of attending this webinar? So that's on a scale of 1 to 10, please submit those on the right-hand side. And finally, 3, which is another 1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to begin exploring the use of AI or machine learning to complement your work over the next year? Okay, so we should be getting some responses in now. So if I see them on my screen, I'll just have a look. Okay, so good. So we are having the first one. So excellent. So it's heartening to see that nobody has said still can't see the benefit of using it in my work. So it's an hour that we've not wasted. That's fantastic. It's a roughly 60-30 split. It's a third, 2/3 of interest and actively interested. So that's that does reflect well on what we saw earlier. So I think that's definitely an improvement. When I think we were sort of slightly more biased to be interested, but not quite there yet. But I think we're doing well to have moved that along. If we move on to question number 2. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your knowledge of the use of AI? This is good. So this is a question obviously we didn't ask at the beginning because we hadn't had the webinar yet. So it looks to me that the majority of people are a 7 or above, which is excellent, which means that hopefully everyone's gained. And it's heartening to see that 1/5 of people, roughly 1/5, feel that they're massively increased their knowledge, which is absolutely fantastic. And then finally, number 3, which is a scale of 1 to 10 again, how likely are you to begin exploring the use of AI to complement your work? And again, it's looking like the vast majority of people are going to be, and a lot of them are 9s and 10s and 8s, which is excellent. So that's showing that this is going to be a big part of your industries moving forward, and AI is going to take a broader part of that. So okay, so thank you very much for that. What we're doing, we're now running out of time, unfortunately, but I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure to host today's webinar. We'd like to thank you all for attending first and foremost. I hope you've got something out of it. The poll results would suggest hopefully that you have. I'm sure there's questions. I'm sure there are elements within it which were not completely clear, which we can address. More than happy to do that. Thank you to Chris and Matt for your contributions. Nice to have you. And just to let you know, for your convenience, we will be sending out a link to the complete recording of this video, which will allow you to watch it back at your leisure, maybe some of the slide details, some of the nuances that you want to have a look at. Also, a copy of the slides will be sent to everyone who registered for the event. But if you know someone, if you've already been looking through and thinking, yes, this is something I'm certainly interested in, we'd encourage you to have a look at the links on the right-hand side of the screen. You've got some options there, one of which is to sign up to a demo, exploratory demo, which would be with a member of the team. You can also contact the team members directly with your questions, and you can send more general inquiries as well. So there's all 4 options on the right-hand side. And I'd encourage you to utilize those right now. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and goodbye.